1 inch. That was the gap between execution and survival. A white line was painted across the cobblestones of Rome's St. Peter's Square on a chilly morning in 1943. It was merely paint to a tourist. However, the man behind it thought it was the world's deadliest border. 10,000 SS stormtroopers, a Gestapo spy network, and Italy's most brutal executioner were stationed on one side of the line. They possessed tanks, machine guns, and orders from Berlin to completely destroy the city. A lone man was standing on the opposite end of the queue. He had no firearm. He had no army. He had no knife at all. All he had was a prayer book and an overwhelming quantity of adrenaline. He was a 6'2" Irish priest. He had been shouted at, spat at, and ultimately threatened with death by the Nazi commander. "The moment you step 1 single inch outside this square, I will have you shot on sight," he said, aiming his Luger at the priest's chest. The basement is where most men would have hidden. The majority of guys would have asked for a miracle. However, Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty wasn't holding out hope for a miracle. He examined the white line. He turned to face the Nazis who were about to murder him. He then looked at his watch. He was just going to push right through to his meeting. This is not a religious tale. This is the tale of how one amateur spy used disguises, forgeries, and steely nerves to disgrace the entire Third Reich in the greatest cat-and-mouse game of World War II. He was referred to as the Vatican's Scarlet Pimpernel. However, he was just a ghost that the Nazis were unable to capture. You must comprehend the monster a priest was battling in order to comprehend how he got to be Rome's most wanted man. There must be a villain in every great story, and Rome in 1943 had the worst. Herbert Kappler was his name. Kappler was worse than your average yelling movie Nazi. He remained silent. He had a degree. He approached murder as if it were a math problem. Kappler set up his base on Via Tasso when the Germans took over Rome in September 1943. Remember that name. 80 years later, Romans still repeat it with a lower voice. Kappler converted a lovely apartment complex into a butcher. In order to prevent the inmates from knowing whether it was day or night, he bricked up the windows. To break their minds, he put bright lights on all day, every day. The shouting never ceased, so locals moved to the other side of the street. Kappler's task was straightforward. Clean up Rome. Locate the Jews, locate the Allied prisoners who have fled, locate the resistance fighters, and eliminate them. And it was effective for the first couple weeks. The SS worked well. They were horrifying. Fear paralyzed Rome. However, there was consolation in the Vatican. In the midst of a conflict zone, the Vatican was a small island of safety and a neutral state. Hugh O'Flaherty was having a great time. He was a 45-year-old senior ambassador who enjoyed boxing, played golf every morning, and had supper with cardinals every evening. He was secure. The conflict was merely a newspaper headline as long as he remained behind the walls of the Vatican. The cries from Via Tasso could have been disregarded. He might have been a simple priest. However, O'Flaherty had an issue. He was unable to remain motionless. He had visited Italian prisoner of war camps for years before to the occupation. He was the one who delivered letters, candies, and literature from home to the American and British soldiers imprisoned by Mussolini. He was familiar with these men's names, spouses' names, and preferred soccer teams. These prison camps disintegrated into anarchy after Italy submitted and the Germans assumed control. Thousands of Allied forces fled into the Italian countryside, including South African gunners, American infantry, and British pilots. They lacked firearms, food, and maps, and they were on their way to Rome, the only location they knew might be secure. Starving, bleeding, and afraid, they began to appear at the Vatican gates at night. The large Irishman was requested. They requested O'Flaherty. This was the pivotal time. Staying neutral was the official Vatican policy. Don't agitate the Germans. It was an act of war to assist fugitive inmates. In addition to violating German law, O'Flaherty would be jeopardizing the Catholic Church's neutrality if he assisted them. He proceeded to his room. He paced the ground. He watched the German patrols walking in the square below through the glass. He was aware that once he opened the door, there would be no turning back. You don't experiment with opposition. Either you are in or you are out. The door was opened by O'Flaherty. He didn't have a big idea at first. He had an apartment at first. He rented a tiny apartment outside the Vatican walls with his own funds. He hid 3 British soldiers in the flat after smuggling them past the Swiss guards. He then purchased civilian clothing from them. He then falsified several identification documents. He was making it up as he went along, so it was amateur hour, but it worked. Then there were 10 soldiers instead of just 3. 10 turned became 20. The refugee flow had become a flood by October. Then came October 16, 1943, the day that altered everything. When the trucks came, the sun had just begun to rise. The Jewish ghetto was Kepler's target. The goal of the raid was to cause as much fear as possible. Families were dragged from their beds by the SS as they went door to door. Age was irrelevant to them. Babies were taken. Grandmothers were taken. More than 1,000 individuals were put onto trucks that were parked close to the historic ruins. O'Flaherty saw it take place. He witnessed the violence. He saw the lack of interest. He also noticed the world's quiet. They were not saved by an army. To maintain its neutrality, the Vatican said nothing. Hundreds of miles to the south, the Allies were stuck. The amateur quit playing games that morning. The golfer vanished. The spy was created. O'Flaherty came to the conclusion that he couldn't handle this on his own. He required structure. He required a network. Additionally, he assembled one of the most bizarre spy teams ever. Instead of recruiting soldiers, he recruited those who were not given a second glance. The Irish ambassador's wife, Delia Murphy, was his right-hand woman. She was a famous singer who hosted fancy events for Nazis. While they were preoccupied, she would pour them champagne, sing them Irish folk tunes, and sneak fake documents around the city in her handbag. Henrietta Chevalier, a Maltese widow, was one of his recruits. She lived in a little flat with 6 kids. She declined O'Flaherty's request to conceal 2 refugees. "Send me 4," she said. By the end of the month, she was sheltering so many guys in her little apartment that they were sleeping on the kitchen floor and in the bathtub. To serve as his messenger, he hired a sweeping lad from the Vatican cleaning staff. He hired a count from Switzerland. 2 young New Zealand priests were recruited by him. They formed the council together. It functions and sounds like something from a movie. They eliminated people rather than merely hiding them. They established safe havens all across Rome, including in private residences, brothels, convents, and even SS barracks. O'Flaherty discovered that hiding someone right beneath the enemy's nose was frequently the safest option. However, it takes a lot of money to hide people. You must purchase food on the illicit market. Bribes must be paid. Rent must be paid. O'Flaherty was a clergyman. He was paid nothing. Thus, he executed the first contemporary financial hack. He found out that the Nazis were about to grab the cash that wealthy Americans and Brits had hidden in Italian banks. O'Flaherty struck a bargain with them. "Give me your money right away. I'm going to use it to save lives. The British government will reimburse you with interest after the war." Millions of lira started to pour into his coffers as a result of the loan, which was based only on his handshake. By November 1943, O'Flaherty was leading a shadow government in addition to a rescue effort. He was responsible for the safety of 3,000 people. He kept a ledger, a real book, in which he recorded each person's name, address, and required amount of money. Consider this for a moment. While Rome was under occupation, he maintained a written list. 3,000 individuals would be executed if the SS ever discovered that book. It was the city's most hazardous item. Every day, O'Flaherty kept it in his pocket. He kept it under his pillow while he slept. It was careless. It was crazy. O'Flaherty, however, exuded confidence. He didn't anticipate being discovered. Herbert Kapler, however, was not a fool. On the illicit market, it is impossible to purchase thousands of pounds of bread without someone noticing. It is impossible to rent 60 flats without someone inquiring. Kapler began to notice a pattern. Allied pilots shot down close to Rome were disappearing before his patrols could apprehend them. An hour before the trucks came, Jews who were supposed to be deported started vanishing from their houses. Kapler turned on his network of spies. He had informants everywhere, including irate neighbors, taxi drivers, and waiters. The Vatican was the destination of all the murmurs. O'Flaherty is just one name. The game abruptly altered. Kapler wanted to crush the operation, not simply halt it. He gave the order for a surveillance squad to follow O'Flaherty around the clock. At this point, the narrative becomes an espionage thriller. O'Flaherty was aware that someone was pursuing him. He would see the man in the trench coat reading a newspaper on the corner as soon as he left the Vatican to go to a safe place. A weaker man would have returned inside. It was like a sport to O'Flaherty. He began donning unflattering disguises for theater. He had to deliver cash to a safe house across the river one afternoon. Every bridge was a checkpoint for the SS. A towering Irish priest was what they were searching for. O'Flaherty visited the Vatican heating plant as a result. He discovered a coal sack and covered his hands and face with soot. He put on a flat cap and a tattered workman's jacket. He concealed his 6'4" height by slouching his shoulders. He passed the German guards as he left the Vatican gates. He passed the SS checkpoint. He handed the money, walked all the way to the safe house, and then walked back. He passed 2 Gestapo operatives who were actively searching for him on his way back. He gave them a tip of his cap. They saw right through him. He was just another filthy Roman worker to them. After returning to his room, he cleaned the coal, put on his robes, and attended evening prayer. He once dressed like a postman. He even dressed as a nun at another occasion. Consider a 6'2" man attempting to walk like a nun. It wasn't supposed to work. However, his boldness was what shielded him more effectively than any disguise. Nobody dared to question him because of the assurance with which he strode. However, Kapler was growing irritated. A priest in a coal sack was humiliating the most feared guy in Italy. Kapler made the decision to escalate. Due to diplomatic neutrality regulations, he was unable to detain O'Flaherty within the Vatican. A worldwide rebellion would result from German forces storming the Vatican. Hitler was against that. Kapler made the decision to pull O'Flaherty out. He began to raid the safe places. He detained the Italian families who were assisting them in addition to the others who were hiding inside. At Via Tasso, he tormented them. He desired for them to surrender. He was looking for evidence that connected the priest to the resistance, such as a signature or a witness. O'Flaherty was under tremendous pressure. Every time he went out, he put not only his own life at danger, but also the lives of everyone he came into contact with. The inevitable occurred one evening. Luck ran out. O'Flaherty was at Prince Doria Pamphil's safe home. It was a palace with secret passageways. The front door crashed open when O'Flaherty was carrying supplies in the basement. Gestapo! No one moves. A raid took place. O'Flaherty was stuck. Above him, he could hear the SS heavy boots scuffing the marble floors. Every room was being examined. They were descending the steps. There was no way out. No secret tunnel existed. O'Flaherty surveyed the basement. The cellar was made of coal. Coal was dumped from street level down a tiny chute. It was steep, dirty, and narrow. The sound of the footsteps grew louder. The German orders were audible to him. O'Flaherty dragged himself up by grabbing the coal chute's edge. He tore his garments and scraped his skin as he dragged his 6-foot body through the black dust. Below him, He could hear someone kicking open the cellar door. Gasping for air and covered in coal dust, he leaped out onto the street. However, he was still in danger. He was surrounded by SS trucks while on the street during a raid. He was a tall, black figure emerging from the earth when a German soldier turned to face him. O'Flaherty did not flee. They would shoot if he fled. He brushed off his jacket, straightened up, and approached a group of Italian bystanders who were observing the raid with composure. He began conversing with them in Italian, fitting in and pretending to be an interested onlooker. The German soldier paused. An automobile pulled up during that moment of doubt. One of his network drivers was involved. O'Flaherty leaped in. Just as the bullets began to fly, the automobile roared away. He had barely made it out alive. Kapler lost it that evening. He came to the conclusion that raids would not be able to apprehend this man. Spies were unable to apprehend him. He had to personalize it. We returned to the White Line as a result. Kapler gave his workers the task of painting a white line across St. Peter's Square's entrance. It delineated the precise limits of Vatican authority. On the rooftops across from the square, he placed 2 snipers. He placed a team of Gestapo officers at the border cafes. Then he messaged O'Flaherty. It was not coded. It was open to the public. You're dead if you cross this line again. You won't be arrested by me. I'm not going to question you. The chessboard was ready. O'Flaherty was imprisoned within the Vatican. Outside, his network was in dire need of leadership. There was not much money left. There wasn't much food left. Kapler grinned as he sat in his Via Tasso office. At last, he had triumphed. The priest was confined by him. He just needed to wait for him to either starve or give up. However, Kapler had made a crucial error in judgment. He believed O'Flaherty was playing defense. He believed the priest was making an effort to live. He was mistaken. O'Flaherty was on the offensive. Additionally, O'Flaherty was already excavating a tunnel beneath the White Line while Kapler was keeping an eye on it. The priest had not finished. It was going to grow much bloodier. In the sand, Kapler had created his line, which was essentially a white paint stripe that divided life from death. He anticipated that the sniper scopes fixed on the square would paralyze O'Flaherty and cause him to cower inside the Vatican. One thing, though, had slipped Kapler's mind. You can trap a body, but not a reputation. Every evening, Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty would emerge from St. Peter's Basilica as the sun began to set. He refused to flee. He refused to hide. He would stop precisely 1 inch from the White Line as he casually descended the steps while puffing on his pipe. He would simply stand and smoke for an hour while staring at the Gestapo officers on the other side of the street. He would give them a wave. He would grin. It was the pinnacle of power. I am here, he was saying to them. I continue to work. Additionally, there is nothing you can do about it. The Nazis were incensed. They would wait for him to slip, for a toe to breach the line, their knuckles going white as they gripped their submachine guns. He never slipped, though. O'Flaherty was using himself as bait, in addition to making fun of them. His couriers were sneaking out the back exits of the Vatican, delivering cash and maps to the safe homes, while the entire Gestapo unit was watching at him on the steps. The diversion was him. However, 4,000 people cannot be fed by a diversion. The situation was dire by January 1944. Winter had arrived. It was quite cold. Rome was also going hungry. All of the food supplies for their own soldiers were being seized by the Germans. The price of flour on the illegal market has increased by 500%. Thousands of escaped prisoners from O'Flaherty were concealed throughout the city in attics and cellars. They were consuming rats. To make soup, they were boiling leather belts. They would have to give up in order to eat if they didn't receive actual food within a few days. They required a supply chain, but he lacked trucks, which are necessary for smuggling large amounts of food across a combat zone. Thus, he successfully completed Mission Haystack. He made arrangements for carts to arrive in Rome every day, purportedly carrying hay for horses, after reaching out to a group of understanding Italian farmers outside the city. At the checkpoints, the German guards would wave them through after poking the hay with bayonets and finding nothing. They didn't delve far enough. Wheels of cheese, dried meat, and bags of potatoes were placed in the middle of each hay bale. After entering the city, the hay was distributed to seemingly harmless places including a convent, a bakery, and a flower shop. The food would then be transported in backpacks to the safe houses by Outsmarted's network of street urchins, who included children as young as 10. It was a masterwork of logistics. From a tiny desk in a neutral church, Outsmarted was managing a supply operation that was on par with the U.S. Army. But there were other issues besides food. The network was losing money. It was costly to bribe German guards. It was costly to pay rent for 60 flats. Outsmarted's financing program with affluent foreigners was coming to an end. He was in urgent need of money. This leads us to the drop on the golf course. Prior to the war, Outsmarted was an avid golfer. He couldn't play now that he was confined to the Vatican, but he knew others who could. He was able to convey his need for gold to the British envoy. The British government concurred. How do you get British gold to Rome? They drove diplomatic vehicles. A particular spot close to the Vatican walls would be passed by a vehicle bearing diplomatic license plates. A hefty crate would be thrown into an area of shrubs, and a window would slide down. A gardener, who was actually one of Outsmarted's Irish priests, would rake the leaves in that location, dig up the box, and return inside a few minutes later. American dollars and gold sovereigns were found inside those crates. Outsmarted took on the role of bagman. He would give the money to his runners in envelopes. But the strain was wearing you down. Compare pictures of Outsmarted taken in 1943 and 1944. He appears youthful and energetic in 1943. His eyes are sunken by 1944. He is now lighter. He wasn't dozing off, because it was too risky to write down the specifics of 4,000 lives. He was preserving them in his mind. The worst situation then materialized. The network broke. It began with a straightforward error. A young Italian male who was one of Outsmarted's main messengers was apprehended at an arbitrary checkpoint. He appeared anxious. After searching him, the soldiers discovered a list of addresses concealed in his shoe. It would have been mercy if they had put him to death on the street. He was brought to Via Tasso. Kapler left for his job. Although the specifics of what transpired in the basement are unknown, we are aware of Kapler's techniques. He would extract his fingernails. One by one, he would shatter fingers. He would pretend to drown. The courier broke after 3 terrible days. He gave up a place. The seminary raid. It served as a safe haven for 3 British pilots and 12 Jewish refugees. At 3 in the morning, the SS struck it. The doors were kicked down with such force that the frame broke. The following morning, Outsmarted fell into a chair upon hearing the news. 15 persons have left. He held himself responsible. Every strike and scream was felt by him. However, Kapler wasn't finished, so he didn't have time to mourn. Torturing couriers was too slow, Kapler realized. He had to chop off the snake's head. Outsmarted was necessary to him. Additionally, Kapler chose to drag the priest across the white line when he refused to do so. The attempt on his life. It was a daring, nearly suicidal scheme. Kapler dispatched a group of 4 men to St. Peter's Basilica in civilian attire. They carried handguns and hidden knives. Their instructions were straightforward. Wait for Outsmarted to arrive for evening prayer, then seize him, drag him out the door of the church, and toss him into a car that was waiting on the other side. Shoot to kill everyone who tries to stop them. Inside the world's holiest structure, an abduction operation took place. Outsmarted was making her way toward the altar in the church's nave. The church was dark, with just candles for light. He noticed 4 males standing next to a pillar. They didn't appear to be pilgrims. They stood too rigidly. They had their hands inside their coats. O'Flaherty's gut told her that something was wrong. He had reached halfway to them. They would pursue him and shoot him in the back if he turned and fled. They would seize him if he continued to move. He performed the one thing they weren't prepared for. He marched directly in their direction. But at the last moment, he turned left to face a group of Swiss guards stationed at a side exit. In addition to carrying the medieval axe spears known as halberds, the guards also carry concealed handguns. Standing just next to them, O'Flaherty pointed at the four men and began a boisterous conversation. The hit squad froze. They became aware that the element of surprise had been lost. They couldn't win the slaughter that would result from attacking a priest who was surrounded by armed Swiss guards. O'Flaherty returned their glare. They then gradually retreated and vanished into the darkness. The net was becoming tighter, but he had survived once more. The darkness then descended. The darkest day in Rome's history was March 23, 1944. A column of SS troopers traveling through the city was attacked by Italian rebels. They detonated a bomb. 33 German soldiers lost their lives. Hitler was enraged. "I want 10 Italians dead for every German killed," he commanded directly from Berlin. "Put them to death right away." 100%. 330 individuals. Kepler needed people, so he rounded up prisoners and Jews who were about to be deported. He removed random bystanders off the street. He assembled 335 men and boys, 5 more than the order, just to be safe. He took them to the network of tunnels outside the city known as the Ardeatine Caves. After it was finished, they sealed the bodies inside the caves by blowing up the entrance. From his chamber, O'Flaherty heard the blast. At first, he had no idea what it was. However, something inside of him broke when the news came in. This was no longer a game. It wasn't a chase and disguise spy thriller. It was a mass murder. His friends, those who had supported the network, and those he had pledged to defend were among the deceased. The following day, Kepler delivered a message with a list of the deceased to the Vatican. "You see what happens when you resist. Now it's your turn." Most men would have given up. The price is too exorbitant, according to the majority of guys. The list was read by O'Flaherty. He sobbed, got to his feet, and wiped his face. He told his squad, "We don't stop. We intensify." He saw that the fall of Rome was imminent. Along the coast, the Allies were engaged in combat. 30 miles away, the Battle of Anzio was in full swing. A losing army is a dangerous one, and the Germans knew they were on the brink of defeat. Kepler was gearing up for a drastic solution in Rome, planning to wipe out all remaining prisoners and destroy the city's bridges and dams as they retreated. There were 4,000 people hiding in O'Flaherty. Those 4,000 civilians were sitting ducks if the Germans chose to set fire to the city as they were leaving. He required a grand scheme. He had to make the switch from hiding to fighting. He told the safe shelters to arm themselves. A priest gave the contentious command for individuals to obtain firearms. But O'Flaherty was aware that prayers would not stop gunfire when the time came. He purchased weaponry on the black market, including rifles, grenades, and pilfered German Lugers, using the wealth he still had. The network started to change into a militia. April became May. The sound of artillery approached. In the distance, you could hear the roar of American cannons. With each blast, the Vatican's windows trembled. Kepler's desperation was growing. He was aware that his time was limited. He only needed to play one more card. He chose to ruin O'Flaherty's reputation after failing to capture him. He launched a propaganda effort. He spread rumors that O'Flaherty was stealing money from the church as a British agent. He falsified records that showed him with sex workers. He attempted to have the Pope fire him. However, after being so quiet and circumspect, Pope Pius XII finally took action. The Pope just stated, "We have no knowledge of any illegal activities. in response to the German ambassador's demand that O'Flaherty be taken into custody. It bought O'Flaherty time, but it was a lie, a sacred lie. June 3, 1944. Now the roar of tanks could be heard. On the periphery of the city were the Americans. Kapler was burning documents inside Vietasso. The chimneys were filled with smoke. He was getting ready to run. However, he had one final directive to issue: the purging. He gave the order for the last sweep of the city by his last SS soldiers. Everyone in the safe houses should be killed. Don't leave any witnesses. The time was 6:20 p.m. The sun was sinking. The Germans had 12 hours to kill 4,000 people before they had to retreat. O'Flaherty received the call. They are on their way. Everyone is in danger from them. He examined the white line. He observed the mayhem in the streets. This was the last stand. He reached for his cloak. He reached for his ledger. Additionally, he didn't stop at the line for the first time in months. He crossed it with his foot. June 3, 1944, at 7 o'clock p.m. The Third Reich was fading along with the sun above Rome. Hugh O'Flaherty, the Monsignor, crossed the white line. He didn't turn around. He got into one of his teenage runners' beat-up Fiat Topolino. They raced into the night as the engine screamed to life and stuttered. This was now a race rather than a Cold War. The SS death squads had remained behind with the primary goal of scorched earth, burning the files, destroying the bridges, and killing the witnesses while the German army was withdrawing north. In his mind, O'Flaherty had a list: 4,000 lives, 60 safe houses. He had 12 hours to ensure that the weapons were prepared, the lights were off, and the doors were closed. The city was in disarray. German tanks were withdrawing as they grinded through the city. Speeding north were trucks full of pilfered Italian artwork. O'Flaherty's small Fiat was navigating the back alleys in the middle of this mechanical stampede. The first safe house was hit by him. He pounded on the door. He told them to stay down. This door should only be open to Americans. Shoot through the wood if the Germans knock. He struck the third and second houses. He reached the fourth house, a convent close to the Colosseum, right as a German patrol car arrived. O'Flaherty dove into a doorway shadows. With their weapons lifted, he saw 4 SS troops leap out. They were searching for treasure, liquor, and someone to murder for fun. Despite being unarmed, O'Flaherty was aware of a fact about the German army that they had overlooked in their panic. They were afraid of their rank. He emerged from the darkness. Instead of his coal merchant disguise, he was dressed in his full Monsignor robes, with the scarlet sash piercing the darkness. He approached the German sergeant directly. His German was flawless. He didn't inquire about their activities. He yelled at them. He screamed, "Is this how the Wehrmacht conducts itself? You're postponing the retreat. 2 miles distant are the Americans. Would you like to be caught stealing from a nunnery?" The sergeant froze. The garments caught his eye. He noticed the assurance. He glanced at his soldiers before turning back to face the insane Irish priest. "Go!" shouted the sergeant. They leaped back into the truck and drove off. O'Flaherty didn't hold back his breath. He returned to his vehicle. He said, "Next house." The Scarlet Pimpernel haunted the city all night long. Checkpoints were avoided by him. Tiger tanks roared overhead as he huddled beneath bridges. As the shepherd, he made sure the wolves couldn't pass through the gate before dawn. Dawn on June 4th. The ground trembled with a rumbling rumble. It was not artillery. It had hefty engines and was deeper. O'Flaherty was on the Vatican College roof. He lifted his binoculars. He turned to face the Appian Way in the south. Then he noticed it. An olive-drab steel with a white star painted on it. The Americans. Rome, the first Axis capital to fall, was reached by General Mark Clark's Fifth Army. The streets were flooded with people. People threw flowers at the dusty American GI, sobbed, and kissed the tank treads. The windows of Via Tasso were flung open for the first time in 9 months. The inmates who had not been put to death staggered out into the sunlight, blinking like skeletons amid the living. However, O'Flaherty went to work while Rome rejoiced. He abstained from champagne. He visited the Colosseum, where hundreds of refugees were coming out of hiding. He began setting up food trucks. He began bringing families back together. Then he posed the query that everyone was curious about: where is Kapler? Hours before the Americans came, Herbert Kapler had run away. He carried his wrath, his gold, and his files with him. He disappeared to the north. The European war continued for an additional year. O'Flaherty remained in Rome, repairing the damage caused by the Nazis. He was praised as a hero. He received the CBE from the British. He received the Medal of Freedom from the Americans. But medals didn't matter to O'Flaherty. After placing them in a drawer, he resumed his golf game. Justice, however, has a long memory. British special troops located Kapler in 1945. He was detained and tried for war crimes, including the slaughter at Ardeatine Caves and the 335 innocent victims he cold-bloodedly killed. The trial was an experience. The beast of Rome was shown to the world in a cage. He sat there, haughty, unrepentant, and stone-faced. He asserted that he was just following orders. The court rejected it. He received a life sentence without the possibility of release. He was taken to the Italian coastal fortification known as Gita Prison. That should be the conclusion of the narrative. The hero prevails. In a cell, the villain rots. The credits roll. Hugh O'Flaherty wasn't finished, though. He had defeated Kapler militarily and strategically, but not spiritually. An automobile arrived at Gita Prison's gates one morning in 1947. A towering priest emerged. He approached the warden. He declared, "I'm here to see a prisoner." "Which one?" inquired the warden. "Kapler, Herbert." It seemed like a joke to the warden. Why would the man Kapler attempted to murder want to see him? Was he there to brag? To spit in his face? To see him go through pain? O'Flaherty strolled along the lengthy stone hallway. The massive iron door was unlocked by the guard. Kapler raised his head from his bed. He spotted the man he had been pursuing for the past 2 years, the man he detested above all others, the man he had set traps for. O'Flaherty refrained from screaming. He was not a preacher. He took a seat on the stool. He said, "Hello, Herbert." O'Flaherty paid Kapler a monthly visit for the next 10 years. Consider the discipline required. In combat, pulling a trigger is simple. It is simple to despise your adversary. However, it's not simply difficult to get into a car, travel for 4 hours, and sit in a chilly jail with the person who killed your friends. It is nearly impossible. He continued to think of himself as the master race. However, O'Flaherty persisted. He brought books with him. He carried tobacco with him. He discussed the weather, literature, and Ireland. He was a man to the monster. The water dripped on the stone year after year. Kapler started to break under kindness rather than torture. He was unable to comprehend it. One day he inquired, "Why? Why have you come here?" "I attempted to murder you. I murdered your pals." O'Flaherty gave him a look. "I must love my neighbor according to my God." He did not claim that it would be simple. The discussions became more in-depth. They discussed guilt. The 335 bodies in the caverns were discussed. They discussed the soul. The longest exorcism in history was being performed by O'Flaherty. He was attempting to extract the man's Nazi side. 12 years after the visit started, in 1959, Kapler requested a priest. Not just any priest, either. He requested O'Flaherty. The former SS colonel, the butcher of Rome, knelt on the concrete floor of that cramped, wet prison cell. He asked to be baptized into the Catholic Church while bowing his head. Hugh O'Flaherty doused his adversary's head with holy water. The SS officer was washed away by him. He purged the hatred. O'Flaherty appeared worn out as he left the prison that day. He was now elderly. He had white hair. It would only be a year before he had his stroke. He was once asked by a reporter, "How could you forgive him? How is it possible to pardon a monster?" O'Flaherty grinned, just as he had grinned at the Gestapo officers at the White Line. He declared, "He isn't a monster. He is simply a lost man." Additionally, a priest's responsibility is to locate misplaced items. In 1963, Hugh O'Flaherty passed away. He passed away quietly in his sister's Irish garden, far from Via Tasso's cries. There was no state funeral for him. He didn't possess millions of dollars. However, 6,500 families stopped and prayed for him when he passed away. The White Line is no longer there in St. Peter's Square. Time and the footsteps of millions of tourists have erased it. However, there is a modest plaque in the vicinity of the German cemetery within the Vatican. Additionally, a tree named the Righteous Among the Nations has been planted in his honor at the Yad Vashem monument in Israel. Therefore, keep in mind the Irish priest in the coal merchant's hat the next time you believe that one person cannot change anything, that the system is too large, the enemy is too powerful, or the evil is too profound. Recall the man who refused to blink while standing just inches from death. Keep in mind that a gun isn't the best defense against evil. It's not a tank. It's not even a strategy. When the devil knocks, it takes guts to answer and say, "Not today." This was the tale of Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, the man who saved 6,501 lives instead of merely 6,500. Click the like button now if this story touched you and you think that bravery should be honored. It aids in the discovery of further lost heroes. And don't forget to subscribe, as we will be sharing the stories of the many ghosts in history who are just waiting to speak.